once again, ladies and gents and they them thems. I'm Mark of Krypton and welcome to my channel very first Halloween special and video game theme video, where I'm gonna be talking about the horror game Dead by Daylight. Dead by Daylight can be described as a sort of love letter to the horror genre, specifically the slasher kind, aka scary dude chases people around with a knife, usually teenagers, with the game giving you the option to play as either the killer or the survivor. The roster includes both its own set of original killers and licensed guest characters, to the point where some call it the Smash Brothers of the horror genre. My favorite part about Halloween is the atmosphere all around me during the month of October. From spooky decorations, Halloween specials on TV, and most of all, costumes. You can't have a spooky time without a spooky look. As also what we're gonna delve into today. I'm gonna be analyzing and ranking the base character designs of all the Dead by Daylight original killers, so no licensed loonies. I'm gonna be looking at the shapes in their designs, the colors they wear, the weapons they wield, and whether or not does it match their overall backstory, personality and vibe. So without further ado, let's begin. Alright, so here we are on Tier Maker with all the killers present in the game, but as I said before, we're gonna be looking at anything that is a Dead by Daylight original creation. And here we go. Now, let's go through each and every ranking. Rank S is me saying I personally love this and I think it's a genuine work of art. Rank A is me saying I really like this but I think there's areas for improvement. In B we have I like this but I don't think it's groundbreaking either way. In D we have I dislike this but it's not the bottom of the barrel. And in the very last tier that I don't think I'm gonna use ever unless we talk about very special cases, I despise this with every strand of my DNA and I do not deem its existence worth talking about any further than this. Before we start, a reminder that this is all just my opinion and my rankings, but you're welcome to express your agreements or disagreements down below. And now let's begin. The very first monster we're gonna be talking about, it's gonna be ironically not one you can play as, because on our mention, the entity herself. The entity is an interdimensional, entity that basically plays the role of the main villain of the game, snatching both killers and victims from various points in time, space, and even in different universes for a twisted game of cat and mouse. While all other killers represent the slasher genre, aka chasey stabby stabby, the entity embodies another kind of horror, the cosmic horror. Basically the idea that of there being something out there so terrifyingly massive and incomprehensible that we're not just powerless to stop it, but feel utterly meaningless in the grand scheme of it all. It's a very abstract kind of horror, so how exactly do you give a concrete form to something that doesn't really have one by definition? The usual answer is something along the lines of big boy or big boy with tentacles, but DBD takes a different direction. You see, we never see the entity herself fully per se. We only see small parts of it. When survivors are sacrificed to the entity, they're all snagged by pitch black spider-like limbs materializing out thin air before being dragged into a dark cloud. But there's also something weirdly plant-like about the entity, like how his limbs can also resemble tree branches if you look at it that way, or how it develops strange flowers during a certain period, and so on. Overall, the fact that the entity technically lacks an actual design actually helps it a lot in what it's trying to convey. It's not a monster you can see or really run away from. It's not anything concrete, it doesn't have a specific form, and that's the scariest part of it all. The very first actually playable killer in both our list and the game itself is the Trapper, who happens to be also the mascot for the franchise as a whole. The image of a large muscular killer with a mask and a bladed weapon is highly reminiscent of the likes of Jason Voorhees, but Trapper still manages to detach itself from inspiration with its own original ways. Overalls call back to its mining days in his backstory, and also the idea of someone used to work, instruments and craftsmanship and stuff, and the aforementioned physique gives the idea of strength. And most interesting of it all, the amount of spiky stuff all over his body, the sharp traps he likes to use, the wicked grin on a mask full of sharp metal teeth, accompanied by the empty soulless eyeballs, perfectly conveys the idea of a dangerous killer, albeit not 100% evil. You see, in his backstory, he basically did everything out of love for his father, and after being snatched by the entity and transformed into what he is, The spikes coming out of his body represent the sheer torture he endured by this interdimensional being, to the point where he gets fueled by the pain and rage inside him, kinda like a Darth Vader, and he uses that to hunt survivors. Overall, this design is simple yet effective, much like his use of bear traps over supernatural powers like the Phoenix Killers. If the Trapper is DBD's response to Jason, then the Hillbilly is the equivalent of Leatherface, being another chainsaw-wielding hillbilly defined by his trauma and family mistreatment. However, unlike Baba, Hillbilly wasn't even given a name. In fact, he's been abused and neglected by his family for his entire life due to being born deformed. Focusing on that specific point, his tall, gangling frame, burn marks and hunched back definitely give the vibe of a malnourished and mistreated tragic monster, and most notably of it all, and at the risk of sounding insensitive, the design of his deformed face just looks so fantastically unsettling. It's almost as if life itself decided to leave a smudge on his face out of sheer pettiness. But his ever unblinking eyes peering through the bits of skin show that there's clearly someone very aware about the hand he's been dealt with and who will fight back against the world that made him suffer so much. And thus, the hammer and chainsaw reflect not only his farm background, but the sheer brutality he's able to deliver. So while being a different take on his cannibalistic counterpart, despite having a much cooler face design despite technically being the imitation, Hillbilly charms his way to rank A. Now, unlike the first two killers, the Wraith is unique in the sense that it doesn't really have a direct counterpart or inspiration. Instead, his design centers around entirely on his backstory and themes. As the name would suggest, the Wraith signals DBD's very first exploration of the ghosty worsty supernatural killer department. And fittingly enough, there's just something about the whole vibe that just reeks of death. The way he stands tall so menacingly, with his scrawny frame, towering over with his ever unblinking stare, like an omen of death, his glowing white eyes in the darkness, ghostly drapes, the skull sight he uses as a weapon, mummy-like bandages, the belly rings like, the funeral bell and such, and what you can't even tell if it's a mask or a face, blankly staring at you with those glowing eyes. Unlike the former two, of which you can at least guess a professional background, the Wraith is just detached from what we call civilized. His face looks like he's made of branches of wood and he's not even wearing shoes for crying out loud. Almost as if he became something beyond humanity. Just a great first impression overall, but let's dive a little bit deeper into whose ghost we're looking at. You see, this fella right here was once a Nigerian immigrant named Philip. He grew up in a village constantly attacked by warlords and soldiers, and as an adult he worked at a car scrapyard. One day, Philip learns that all the cars he sent to crash actually had people in them. People that his boss wanted dead. And this revelation horrified Philip to the core. In a fit of rage, Philip killed his own boss by throwing him into the crusher. And when he tried to climb out, Philip ripped out his head and spine before vanishing without a trace. The skull he carries, it belonged to his boss. The belly rings was once used by his father to warn the village of the invading warlords. And the reason for the bandages and why his skin looks so burnt and twisted is because he once tried to set on fire the soldiers to shut up his village while they were sleeping. But he got caught in that same exact fire. The story of Philip is one of a man stuck inside a vortex of tragedy and death whenever he follows, whether it's by his hand or not, so it makes perfect sense for him to basically become a Grim Reaper like a figure of sorts, and thus deserves the star spot for nailing the vibe and backstory of this character. Speaking of Angels of Death, the nurse is his very first female killer in Dead by Daylight, and the second one to be a ghost type, but unlike the Wraith, her design unfortunately doesn't need as much for the following reasons. For starters, her backstory has some retcon issues that made it kinda confusing to establish who she is as a person before being grabbed by the entity, but for simplicity's sake, she's essentially a nurse that worked at an awful asylum for 2 decades before becoming just as insane as her patients, if not worse. She wears a 19th century nurse outfit, fitting for a time period, and despite being ripped to shreds, it still makes her an ethereal white figure that conveys the ghostly vibe pretty nicely, on top of the fact that she floats all the time and displays a limited teleportation telekinesis. The weapon is a bone saw, fitting for both the medical procedures and serial killer shenanigans, but without any doubts, the design element with the most personality is her head, constantly covered by a pillowcase in a way that which you can never tell her emotions, and also parallels the way she used to suffocate her patients. Overall, there's unfortunately not too much going on with the design beyond the scary nose ghost type, but she is creepy though. gotta say that. We now return to DBD's formula of going for creativity over basics, as the egg is far from the stereotypical witch a name would imply. Instead, we got another narratively/thematically driven design. Lisa was once a normal girl who was tragically abducted by a village of cannibals who kept her alive while cutting off pieces from her to be eaten. In a desperate attempt to escape, Lisa remembered hexes taught by her grandma as she carved a symbol on the floor and tried to summon something from beyond to get revenge on her captors. She got an answer, but probably not from the source she was hoping for. The entity transformed her into this inhuman-looking monster whose speed and ferocity are matched only by the insatiable appetite for human flesh, which she uses to dismember and devour her kidnappers. On top of her emaciated body conveying the idea of being in an eternal state of hunger, a design seems to be centered around a balance between the unnatural and the unnatural. On one hand, a green color scheme, association with swamps and mud and primal traits such as sharp teeth, claws and ravenous hunger almost make her feel like an agent of modern nature. On the other hand, her being alive despite her heavily mutilated body, inhuman appearance, deformed hand capable of drawing magic and popping out of nowhere are just deeply wrong and unnatural, as expected for a magic user, like something that was forced into existence, like a swamp zombie of sorts. Better yet, she is essentially DBD's take on the Wendigo, a creature of myth said to be the result of people resorting to cannibalism and being turned into twisted monsters because of it. Despite all this, there's the sad reminder that this was once a young girl who just wanted to be a victim no longer, and instead became an arguably even worse monster than the ones she wanted revenge on. Overall, another great design that meshes together recognizable idea with something new and unique. The Doctor is DBD's second medical team killer, though unlike her previous one, her man didn't need any push to dive into sheer madness. The Doctor is in fact the closest thing DBD had at the time to a pure evil villain, with no tragic backstory behind his motives, just pure sadism and love for torture, despite claiming it's just for research. Speaking of, his long white coat not only gives off the vibe of medical professional, but given his stature also makes him look like a pillar, strong, powerful, immovable. And that's a big part of the fear represents, the idea of being strapped and experimented on by people that should be there to help you, but they really aren't, and you can't do anything about it. Powerlessness even plays a factor in his gameplay, given his electric attacks making survivors unable to take any action for a while. And that's on top of shocking their brains with both visual and auditory hallucinations before frying their brains outright. Speaking of fried, while it is nice that his arms are burned for all the electricity he uses, I never really thought that intellectually driven characters should have their arms exposed. Not saying that you can't be intelligent and strong at once, but in this case in particular, I don't think it fits in too well. Another criticism I have is his weapon. It's literally just a stick, with spikes. At least the nurse used a medical instrument even if dated. This thing looks like it was made for hunting vampires more than anything. This, combined with the arms, give him a brutish vibe that I think clashes a bit with the medical professional, with the medical figure he should be embodying. On the other hand, you could make the point that they show he's never really been an actual doctor to begin with. Just someone who studied at the CIA and performed immoral experiments there. But with his shoes and ties still somewhat conveying an element of culture and elegance, it's a bit clashing visual images or either multiple things working at once depending on your perspective. On the subject of perspective, his face is quite something, isn't it? His headgear forcing his eyes and mouth open kinda make up for the lack of actual medical equipment in his hands, further channeling the fear of people forcefully shoving stuff into your body, and it shows his true evil nature with that everlasting smile and a comfortable number of teeth and wide open eyes. Overall, a great design with just a couple of red scratching details. I hope the placement of my ranking won't be too shocking for you. The Huntress' broad-shouldered physique and usage of axes, both big and small, shows you why she dominates the world over all the potential prey she finds, may it be animal or human. But there's more behind that cute bunny mask than you might think. For starters, why a bunny mask to begin with? To answer that, we need to do some more backstory diving. You see, Anna once lived in the Russian woods with her mom, whom taught her all she needs to survive in such environments, before ironically dying herself. Being the only family she's ever had, this scarred Anna's mental state and left her with a void that she wants to fill by any means necessary. You see, Anna is an amazingly skilled hunter, but she's not good at anything else. She can't read, she can't write, and by all intents and purposes, she's mentally a child. She kidnaps little girls for dragging them away from their families after killing them, not out of malice, but a twisted sense of maternal love. But she has no idea how to raise a child who wasn't born in the woods already, and she's devastated every time they die of cold and starvation. Granted, maybe tying them to the wall probably didn't help either. Something that makes her quite unique from other killers is the fact that she's constantly humming a lullaby whenever she's nearby. And while that ironically removes all chances for stealth despite supposedly being an Huntress, it does link back to the themes of childhood and nature, because it's an actual Russian lullaby she's singing. Bayu Shuki Bayu, I hope I didn't butcher that. It's about warning children to not sleep close to the edge of their bed or they'll be snatched by wolves. Ironically enough, the bunny became the wolf now. Overall, the bunny mask is the most crucial element of her visual storytelling. White is said to be associated with innocence, childhood, purity. Bunnies are typically a prey, not a predator, but in this case it's all wrong. Huntress represents a cycle of ruined childhood purity, being both a victim and perpetrator of it. Her pitch black eyes do make her resemble an animal, but them on a human just looks wrong to look at, like she's evolved something that's not really either. There is an element of civilization, with her seraphim including utility belts she stole from World War I soldiers that crossed her path. But she constantly goes out barefoot, which I don't really think is a smart idea in an environment full of sharp things you can step on and bleed and stuff. Though I guess you could argue that barefoot characters are also associated with nature, so maybe it checks. The relaxation of the outfit, off pants and off skirt, there's also seen as a crash between masculinity and femininity on top of anything else. Overall, another simple yet effective character design, if you were to ask me that. Before I show you the design of the next killer, let's delve into his backstory a bit, as a fun thought experiment. Kenneth has been abused and neglected by his father his whole entire life. He was so mentally scarred by the image of his father scolding him with a raised finger that he fantasized many times about cutting it clean off, just to see him suffer. However, his mind also had less morbid thoughts, such as collecting bird feathers as hobbies. No matter what, Kenneth wanted to get closer to his animals. So he created a special anesthetic gas that would knock them out, letting him grab them, and that's where he discovered just how much he enjoyed the feeling of having power over others. Like many early serial killers before him, Kenneth started by killing animals when he was a teenager, with bird feathers now representing his twisted trophies. Once he moved on to humans, he started going the exact same things but with fingers. As he went off with the circus, Kenneth let himself go with all kinds of hedonistic pleasures, such as junk food, alcohol and drugs, leading him to becoming what he is today. An obese, balding and constantly coughing old mess, whose looks are meant to evoke disgust as much as his actions. There is nothing about his backstory which as a character just justifies him being a clown, besides his very last bit at the circus. I'm not saying I wanted clouting gadgets or something, but for being DBD's very first colophobia representative, there's very little clownmanship about who he is. He's not really a killer clown, he's a killer who happens to be a clown, if that makes sense. I just feel like his backstory points towards something much more unique than this, so unfortunately I'll have to rank him low. Despite it being don't get me wrong, it's a creepy clown design and his physical attributes, let's say, are unsettling too, but there's not really much to it that you could not find at, say, a Halloween costume shop, let's say. So unfortunately I have to rank this design at a very rather low tier, because it doesn't really have much to show who he is, besides an archetype that doesn't even fit. We now move towards a killer whose design is specifically linked to Japanese folklore. You know how the very first thing that comes to mind when you hear Japanese ghost lady is long black hair, white robe, unnatural movements, and being back with a grudge? Well, the right term for that is something called an onryo, a vengeful spirit in Japanese. This spirit is DVD's take on that type of ghost, but instead of going with something within the bounds of what you're expecting, like with the nurse and clown, there's an extra step taken. You see, Rin was a Japanese girl like any others, who was trying to help her family poor financial situation while trying to adhere to traditional values. But one day her father was fired, so he decided to vent his rage by grabbing the family katana and slicing her mother to bits. Once she returned home to that horrible sight, she was thrown out of the window by her father, with sheer rage and vengeance being the last thought on her mind. And unfortunately, something hurt her thoughts. This spirit is a deadly bluish skin color, pure white eyes, wild black hair going up as if it was some kind of energy flowing. Her petite physique reminds us that she was a teenager when it all happened, and she covered in sarashi, which is the term for those bandages, and most importantly of all, much like her heart, family name, and house windows, she's shattered, literally filled with glass shards and held together only by whatever interdimensional glue the entity uses. Her movements are twitching and sudden, and she teleports in bursts of light. Again, much like shards of glass reflecting off light. Her weapon is the exact same katana her father uses, following his footsteps by becoming another katana-wielding maniac. She essentially became an embodiment of the moment she died, and the design reflects that beautifully, on top of being an original take on a pre-existing concept. The Legion is a very interesting topic. You see, from what I could gather, there's a lot of hatred directed towards this character, mostly talking about how they're edgy and boring and just a guy with a hoodie, or how the in-game powers isn't quite like what the trailers presented. And from a certain point of view, the things that a lot of people despise about this character are exactly what I love about them. You see, they aren't a big hulking mess of muscle or a supernatural ghost. They're in fact the very first survival-sized killers in the game, meaning that they could chase survivors on a human-to-human basis rather than monster-to-human basis. More Scream than Friday 13, basically. This is beautifully shown in their killer animation. The survivors aren't completely powerless against them. They can fight back to a certain degree, but it's all for nothing. And that, in my opinion, is much more haunting to look at, since, well, when you meet an unstoppable monster, you can't do much but say your prayers. But with an enemy you got a slight chance of evading, and you just nearly managed to do so before dying anyway, to me is a much scarier and tragic idea. To me, the Legion embodies a much more grounded and realistic type of fear, like a kid who almost managed to get home before being stabbed to death by a random mugger, and his mom is now waiting for someone who will never return home anymore. With that lovely image in our brains, let's talk about the actual character and not just my vibes about it, okay? For starters, why do they go by they pronouns? Well, I let Venom explain.
For the last time, Parker, our pronouns are they, them. Not because we are non-binary, but because we are literally two niggas.
The Legion is actually a gang of Canadian teenagers named Frank, Julie, Joey and Susie, with the first being the leader of them all and the rest being followers, with varying levels of I'm totally cool with this in regards to the whole stabby deal. Very creatively, you can actually play as any of the Legion members by changing the skin, but narratively speaking, there aren't 4 masked stabbers running around the Entity realm, no. Each time you play as a Legion member, you're actually playing as whoever controlling the body that already has 3 minds in there. The Entity literally fused them into one being, and for that reason they feel the same as we whenever they talk. The vibe for all Legion members is actually far more grounded, and you can tell that in the character designs. They have simple knives, muted colors, streetwear, masks, hoodies, and from a distance they could pass as a survivor no problem, since they have a human-shaped model. So I think the trailer wasn't trying to convey them shape-shifting, but rather them passing off as human. Thematically speaking, the Legion represents the fear that your child might be going around with bad influences, given how Frank is the mastermind of everyone and the reason why they were snatched by the Entity to begin with. After committing a serious crime because Frank pushed them to do so, the Entity basically forced them all into Frank's body. That way they are even more powerless to do anything about it but, well, follow the leader, literally, becoming now inseparable. And I know it's a simple design, it's basic, but no, it's my deal, it's the fuck cares. Fuck you. Blake signals a return to form for DBD, going for a unique kind of character entirely rather than the unique spin of a pre-existing archetype. She may dress like a mummy, look like a zombie, and buff like a girl in severe need of an exorcism, but the Divis is her own type of monster, and again a very tragic one. You see, long story short, she was a priestess from ancient Babylonia, Mesopotamia, during the times of the plague. When the first sickly woman came for help, Adiris cut off her own toe and prayed for the gods to protect that woman, but this only resulted in her getting the plague herself. She tried all kinds of religious rituals to save both herself and her people from the ever-growing virus, but with no avail. She ultimately decided to exile herself and her followers far away from the city, desperately looking for a cure. And they all ended up grouping in a cave where the coughing and cries for help surrounded the Divis like flies followed their bodies. Priestess was praying for anyone out there to save them, begging for even a whisper in the dark. And she got exactly that, but not from a benevolent godlike figure. Let's just say that in-universe, her and her followers disappeared without trace. Their fate is unknown to the world. But to anyone within the realm of the entity, the tall figure of the priestess is a sign of impending doom. Adiris thinks that by appeasing the entity and chasing down survivors, she will be able to save her followers. She's just a victim as anyone else, all equally stuck in a cycle of endless torment. Now, I absolutely love Blake's design, and this is not just my sincere appreciation for tall ladies talking, but the fact that instead of going for the overly disgusting vibe like they could have logically gone for a plague carrier, or well, like they did for a lot of killers, DBD went for the vibe of something absolutely beautiful that got disgusting. Her tall and elegant look, relatively untouched side of her face, robe made of silk, golden crown, all point towards something awe-inspiring, pristine, immaculate, holy even, sacred. You contain her rotten flesh, bandages everywhere, even decaying outside of her face, tattered clothes, unhealthy greenish color scheme, and you remember that you're essentially looking at a zombie. The thing she carries was meant to exude sweet fragrance found in the gardens attended by priests at the time, but now she bonks survivor's head with it. She was meant to save people from disease, now she's just spreading it. Despite being arguably the closest thing to a good person in this old roster, Adiris ultimately represents a beauty that went to rot, whether physically, metaphorically, or morally. Speaking of unique killers, we now move towards Kazan Yamaoka, aka the Oni. If Yamaoka sounds familiar to you, that's because Kazan is actually the ancestor of the spirit. They're in the same bloodline, same family, everything. However, as you can probably see, Kazan is just a bit chunkier than his great niece. In fact, it may very well be DBD's take on the orc in terms of a sheer muscular embodiment of rage. Delving into his backstory, Kazan, whose name by the way translates into Volcano, very fittingly enough, was a merciless samurai who wanted to quote purify Japan from peasants pretending to be samurais, through a series of killings so gruesome that they named the nickname Oni Yamaoka, translating to the demon Yamaoka. Kazan absolutely hated being referred to as a violent monster, so he decided to prove how wrong everyone was by violently murder the number lord that started this all. On his way, he absolutely brutalized a samurai to try to stop him, realizing way too late that the samurai in question was his own father. This broke Kazan from his rampage for a few minutes before resuming it. After killing every single samurai who stood in his way, he butchered the lord by ripping out his tongue as a punishment for his words. When he exited the mansion, he found himself overwhelmed by villagers, whom, despite Kazan being fully able to take a few of them individually, they were realistically just too many of them, and he ended up being beaten to death before lying on the street. When they all turned around, Kazan's corpse and weapons were gone, starting the rumor that he now ascended to be an actual Oni demon who haunted the village. Well, they weren't too far off with that. Kazan's muscular build, armor and red mask paint him as a being of immense strength and rage, so much that he always took large groups of people to even give him a challenge. His attire is extremely fitting with the cultural timeframe and nation he originates, as a mixture of both great design and cultural accuracy. Kazan uses a canabo, the big spiky baton, to pummel his victims into a puddle, fitting for his approach to things. But most important of all, his bright red eyes, bluish skin and waving white hair, as if he's constantly going Super Saiyan, show us the evolved beyond being one angry boy, as if he physically became the very same demon he was depicted to be figuratively. Granted, the Oni is an actual archetype in Japanese mythology, and his mask does resemble exactly that, but I am glad that he isn't just any Oni from the underworld, but a human with actual backstory and motives, those being of a highly intolerant, petty, and outrageous traditionalist who stopped at nothing to quote, purify what he thought wasn't the perfect world, killing farmers left and right before ironically meeting his end at exactly those ends. Before we yeehaw onto our next killer, let's open a small note. Remember how the Dark Knight trilogy, as amazing as those films were, the characters didn't look as extravagant or colorful as their comic book counterparts, due to it being a more grounded and realistic setting that didn't really have anything too out of the ordinary like magic resurrection pits. That direction wasn't too loved by certain people, who often called it boring, since it wasn't really as flashy as other Batman stories. And I think that's somewhat the same logic you could apply to Deathslinger in comparison to other killers. He's unique in the sense that he has no supernatural backstory, powers, mutation, or even a scary mask. He's just a cowboy in a trench coat, armed with a tool meant to drag his victim to their demise. Technically, even more grounded than Legion, since he only has one mind per body, and two bounty hunters in his time periods was an actual perfection, and is way more quote normal than random alleyway stabbers, contextually speaking anyway. However, I believe that all of this actually works in Caleb's favor more than not, because, simple as it is, his design perfectly captures who he is. First of all, his weapon, the Redeemer, isn't something he was given or stole. He created it, using the knowledge and engineer taught by his father, an Irish immigrant who struggled to find work due to prejudice against Irishmen. Once Caleb found out the railroad tycoon Henry Bayshore that had been secretly stealing money from his parents, Caleb fiercely assaulted him, leading to him ending up in jail for 15 years. Long story short, he befriended the warden to offer him a deal: become a bounty hunter to bring criminals for him to arrest, and I will look up the man you despise so much. Caleb created the Redeemer to fulfill that deal, and with a very important detail: the weapon is not a tool meant to kill, but to capture criminals and slowly drag them towards him. However, previous versions were faulty and thus resulted in disembowelments more than anything, giving him the name Deathslinger. After 6 years of service, Caleb finds out that the prison he was in was bought by Henry Bayshore, the man he was after for all these years. Furious, he raided the penitentiary with his gang, but just before he could get revenge on the warden and Mr. Bayshore, a mysterious fog appeared, and suddenly he was in a strange yet familiar place. The story of Caleb Quinn is one fitting of a western film. Not tragic per se, but definitely lots of violence and revenge involved. Life was never fair to the Deathslinger, and thus he saw very little reason to be fair in return. I know what I said about the role is not supernatural returning to anything, but the way his jaw dislocates in its trailer, the glowing white eyes, greyish skin, are very zombie-ish for sure, but that's really it. It's the bare minimum as far as inhuman supernatural monster goes. Your focus is much more likely to fall on his old, tired and dirty appearance, lean frame, dusty long coat fitting on a bounty hunter, his weapon having something as crafty as a knife attached to the end of it, or the scar outside his face plus the leg brace, or even the scar on his right side of his face plus the leg brace, both as a result of the chaotic shootout. The design prioritizes accuracy to a grounded setting and character over modern flashiness, and for these very reasons I think it excels what it sets out to do. Plus come on, it just looks so badass and intimidating, like you can tell he's been at the Hunter game for a long time just by looking at him. So since it's not anything special, it's special in its own way, but it's not special in a supernatural way, and now I'm saying that with the Legion in it, but hey, the Legion is multiple minds in one body, that's creepy enough. But, is he better than Doctor? Yeah, I think this placement will do for now, but we'll see later at the end. Another man of science coming up next, although this one is far more sympathetic than the previous one on this list. In fact, you might say that Talbot Grimes, aka the Blight, is TBD's take on the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story, but how many nods are there exactly? Well, for starters, both Talbot and Henry Jekyll aim to expand the limit of the human condition to chemical experimentation. Except the former was given his own lab by the military and created his serums that enhance soldiers' endurance and tolerance to pain, but also turned them into violent monsters that attacked entire villages. But Talbot refused to believe such reports to be true, since they were never made official. Long story short, he was busted, shown a graveyard full of people that indirectly died because of experiments, and was thrown alongside the corpses. He was then rescued by monks in a monastery, whom he became a disciple of, and even started studying texts about alternate dimension, which further heightened his sense of ambition to unlock mankind's potential for new enlightenment, despite very much feeling guilty for all the deaths he caused so far, unlike some people. After falling into the pit he shouldn't have studied at, the monks kidnapped him and tried to kill him, but the body mysteriously vanished from the opium den. Once he awakened in the entity's realm, his instinct was to study anything within it, which brought to him discovering a type of blight that the entity is infested by once a year. Reading notes from a previous survivor, Talbot made a serum using those pustules, aka essentially making entity juice for whenever you feel interdimensional heal. He also injected himself suffusible doses too, but one day the entity found out and, well, scrambled his brains in a way that he overdosed himself and permanently turned him into a monster. Now, does the design convey the idea of a scientist whose ambition pushed him into a descent beyond return? I mean, kinda. The extra fingers, hunched back, split open jaw, what seems to be candle wax constantly dripping out of the light source that will never be turned off, inhuman jack-o'-lantern-like eyes, disgusting and pulsating pustules all over his body. And I wouldn't say that the cloak he wears belongs to a specific time period, but I do think it totally fits the idea of dude who works undercover and tries to stop his stuff from another dimension rather well. The cane is an interesting element in his attire, since it conveys a certain element of elegance and class, but I also think it is a direct reference to the versions of the Jekyll story where Mr. Hyde feels public indecency involves beating a little girl with a stick on a sidewalk. Speaking of beating, his rooted appearance mixed with his erratic movements as he forcefully injects himself with the serum and throws it away made some think of a monstrous version of a drug addict, and yeah, I can see that. His green hoodie, green is an element you typically associate with chemistry, potions and stuff, so I think it fits. But otherwise, I don't really think there's much that taps into the whole mad scientist vibe. I don't know, maybe he could like wear a longer cloak or carrying some potions on a belt or even some test tubes, but I guess the lack of proper equipment for his experiments is actually very accurate to his character, since he's always had to deal with using whatever he could whenever he's not kicked into the dirt from wherever he was working for. But I don't think it's gonna matter anymore now, I'm afraid. I think out of pure personal enjoyment, I think the Blight looks really cool, and I think it works, but do I want him to put it here or here? I mean, yeah, I'm gonna put it here. It looks awesome. No, I'll put it here. Yeah, it looks awesome. But the spot is a bit empty. This ranking list, let me think. We're gonna leave it here for now. Going back into the grounded side of things we previously walked on with Deathslinger, where story and character are prioritized over flashiness, the twins are the only killers to technically count as multiple people while actually being two separate characters you can play as, with Charlotte being the main killer and Victor as a secondary power, given how he can come out of her and attack survivors. But how do we get here? Well, you see, while most killers lived a relatively normal life before something tragic happened to them, supernatural or not, Charlotte and Victor have been haunted for the crime of being born, being conjoined twins in times where deformity was seen as the devil's doing. Their mother, Madeline, the only person that ever loved them, was seen as a witch and thus burned alive in front of them. Then they were subjected to inhuman rituals that resulted in Victor's death. and Charlotte had to live the rest of her life on the run with her dead brother still attached to her. This especially caused Charlotte to hate pretty much all humanity, understandably, and when she was taken experimented upon and near to the brink of death, Victor suddenly reanimated and bursted out of her chest in a baby-like zombie form. Before Charlotte had the time to process what was happening, the two were suddenly in a new, foggy place with people running around. But all that mattered to Charlotte and Victor was that they were together again, anyone else be damned. What separates the twins' design for Deathslinger is that there's not really any archetype they could be compared to, in fact being quite possibly DBD's most unique killers. Charlotte, hulking physique, various wounds and illnesses, pale complexion, veins, scabs, discolored limbs all over, perfectly conveys the idea of a protective big sister who spent most of her life hiding in the woods, eating whatever she could find and using whatever she could steal, such as this cycle she modified after she's stealing from a farmer, which also shows her resourcefulness and determination. The inhabitant of her chest cavity, never thought I would say that out loud, Victor, fulfills the scary monster part of their design, being a deformed baby with a third eye on his head, gums with so many teeth he can't even fully close his mouth, fused fingers, and his torso clearly acting as the other half of Charlotte's ribcage. I think this design absolutely speaks for itself how good it is. From here on now, it's just more great stuff to come. We've had killers that look cool as hell, killers with a more toned down design, and up next we have the Trickster. From his very first trailer alone, the character was very controversial, given how out of place he seemed in the dirty aesthetic DBD killers usually go for. I mean, look at them, they look like what Twitter describes Zack Snyder films to look like. And this guy sticks out like a lighter, but honestly, I think that's a major strength in his design rather than a drawback. Everything about this design just screams, look at me, I'm amazing, look at my jacket, look at my pants, look at my hair, look at my abs, look at my eyes, my customized weapons, look at my chains. It's a living sign of narcissism. His fleshy appeal is part of his performance as a K-pop artist, and while bright colors are usually a sign of comfort and cheerfulness, this guy is more like a warning sign. The bright purple happens to also be the secondary colors used by most supervillains, and the blood on his face is the only thing you can guess his true nature from besides his weapon. The fact that he looks the closest to a normal human being, with absolutely zero supernatural elements besides maybe his yellow eyes, but those could be lenses for all I know. But the fact that he doesn't even wear a mask like all the human-like killers, showcases exactly how much vain he is, how much he wants to be known, to recognized. He doesn't want to hide, he wants to be the spotlight. The idea of this Viva, this celebrity whose inner actions are covered by slimy PR and pretty images. As a person, Trickster is another one of those pure evil types, having the double up of a serial killer on top of being a singer. He also uses screams of his victims remixed into his songs, which is lovely. The story delves into how realistically difficult it will be to juggle all of those things at once, leading to his executives. He ultimately decided to kill the last agent by chasing them with a bat, before ending up in a mysterious fog and the entity realm. In game, the Trickster is the slowest runner and he physically excels himself with every move. You can hear his sounds from his sounds that he struggles with pretty much anything that's not throwing knives. And I think that's a neat choice, because it shows that he's not really someone who wants to work for what he gains. He wants to have anything seven up plate. He's not used to struggle or live in the same pain that, say, the twins have. He's a spoiled child taken to the extreme. Now, his name. Trickster doesn't come to the fact that he's a little trickster figure like, say, Loki, but more from the night tricks he performs, it being his name as a K-pop artist, and how he tricked everyone into believing his excuses whenever his true nature was close to being revealed. So hey, at least there is something subtle about him. Also, a fun note, I think his design is in the same language as Jared Leto's Joker, except it actually works, funnily enough. I mean, there's this whole pretty boy, pimp, rich, pretty but daily blood, the fantasizing, people fantasize about him on Tumblr, but he will realistically cut you up, that kind of thing. Next we have the artist, and well, I'm honestly tempted to give her her own tier for how great I think the design is, but I think that will be too much. The Artist is another good example of DBD taking after multiple archetypes and tropes at once to create something entirely new. The Raven motif and tragic backstory remind me of Edgar Allan Poe. The voice sounds like the croaking gasp that the girl from The Grudge does, the Link aesthetic brings to mind Bendy and Ink Machine, of all things, and she kinda resembles the other mother from Coraline, but there are just too much unique traits for me to ignore. The ink on her face pouring like blood, the red in her dress contrasting with the rest of her colors while also emphasizing them, and of course the fact that her elongated neck, inky claws, talons, pitch black eyes, and feathery look make her look like a middle point between a human and a crow, like the result of a transformation that looks like it would have been very painful to go through. Unfortunately, pain is not a feeling that Carmina is a stranger to. Carmina and her younger brother were under the care of an abusive father. To cope with her hard life, Carmina spent most of her time sketching the landscape and feeding the crows next to her house. One day, her brother Matthias tragically drowned, something her dad blamed her for, which left her so desperate that she lost her will to do art, going as far as wanting to jump off a bridge the day of Matthias' birthday. But she was stopped by a bunch of crows, called a murder in English, as wild as it sounds, who encircled her in a way that made Carmina feel wanted, cared for, and that inspired her artistic vein once again to the point of launching a new black ink surrealist art. One day she worked on a giant mural which depicted the greedy company in her town, the Vec label, as a grim reaper figure that harvested the souls of Chilean families. A stunt as controversial as Red Whiskey, with Carmina and her friends end up being kidnapped by a masked gunman. Shortly after she awakens surrounded by a tide of friends, the kidnapper used a knife to cut her tongue and sever her hands, possibly as a way of saying, now you have no instrument to paint us in the bad light anymore. And as she tried desperately to scream in deep pain and rage, her screams summoned the flock of crows that saved her, and they all started tearing apart the man that cut her hands. However, her joy soon turned to terror as she saw that the crows were eating her friends as well, and she was powerless to do anything. Then a dark thought appeared, and she was never seen again. Jesus. Yeah, it has a strong chance of being the darkest backstory in the entire game, to the point that some criticize it for feeling almost mean-spirited in all hopelessness feels. Granted, it is a dark franchise, so it's not that it feels out of place, just that there seems to be this streak with female characters always needing a tragic backstory to become evil, where all pure evil characters are male, which some interpreted as channeling the sexist idea that women are inherently pure and innocent and need world-shaking event to corrupt them. But I leave it up to you if you think that's the case or not. Back to her design, there's a reason why she looks so human-like. We're meant to sympathize with her and her tragedy. Another important factor is that there are no crows in Chile. That was all the entity doing, manipulating her life from the very beginning with his crow servants before turning her into one of them, twisting her features, making her more animal than human, replacing her missing limbs with a twisted reference of what was once her passion. The ink of Carmina's face resembling both tears, blood or ink is a perfect summary of a character for the better or the worse, and overall living proof of how twisted the empathy can get. Well, we started this ranking talking about an abstract monster, and I'm gonna end it in the exact same way. Because the Dredge takes the crown for the most inhuman non-line set killer DBD has ever had. That's because the only human thing about it is the body parts it's made of, and the dark thoughts it was manifested by, visualized by a dark cloud that holds it together. The Dredge represents and feeds on the desperation brought by those who were indoctrinated into a cult, embodying the lack of safety and privacy with the power of teleporting between closets, an hiding area where the players should normally feel safe, but in this case they really aren't. The thing about DBD's least human killer, hell, not even having a human-like model, is that it doesn't really have any backstory or development, it just exists. It was spawned into existence one day. You could compare it to the Boogeyman, with his old dark scary monster in your closet, or even the Grim Reaper with his vulture-like body, bunch of skulls inside like a bandage, but the Dredge is actually DBD's take on a far more obscure monster, an egregore? Egregore. I hope I'm pronouncing this right because I don't have much time to do double takes. A creature described in the Book of Enoch. In ancient Hebrew text, they describe it as autonomous psychic entity that is composed of influencing the thoughts of a group of people. Everything about Always' modular structure seems to center around the idea of pulling things towards you, many hands, suffocating, reaching for you. Something that's almost invading in a very personal way, kinda like how the xenomorph in Alien kinda, was a parallel for another type of forceful breathing, if you get what I mean. His huge mouth making up most part of his body also conveys his hunger, but it's not really a typical hunger. It's more like how he's always hunting for more, always craving for people to shove into his mouth, whether if it's within closets or in the dark clouds that holds together the parts is made of. The way he towers over survivors, how it twists and bends for heavy animation, is just masterful. And I think it definitely deserves to be among the best designs DBD has ever done. So I'm gonna put them. No. Do I put him here? I mean, it looks terrifying as shit, so I might as well. Alright, and these are ranking after some modifications. Honestly, I don't think DBD has even one example of a bad character design, even in the way that adapts Ghostface in a technically original way, but it's still a licensed mask, so I put him here. I honestly think that DBD's potential for originality in the horror genre is very much something to admire, and I really like the way they managed to, find new ways to adapt pre-existing ideas. And even the less original stuff, the original killers they do, they're still at least creepy or unsettling, just in the most original inventive ways. I think there's just a lot to admire, and I want to make a video about it. That said, I have no idea how long this is gonna be, but I hope this video made for a good Halloween, and I wish you an amazing November, amazing rest of the year, and I'll see you in the next time. Orc of Krypton out. I never said that before, how do I usually? I'm Orc of Krypton, and I hope you made your day slightly spookier.